Good Chodesh to everyone. Rosh Chodesh Anar Beis, Chodesh Tov U'Merach. Last night, Baruch Hashem, we had a very nice shir in Kilat Chaverim in Yerushalayim. Unfortunately, the sound was not working during the recording, so I want to share some of what we learned last night with those who weren't able to be there, and hopefully it'll be as if I'm speaking to you live, because I know that you're out there. If you're watching and listening, you're here. So we were speaking about Parshas Pikudei. Parshas Pikudei this year comes by itself, not connected to Vayakel, not connected to one of the four Parshas that we have leading up to Purim and Pesach. And in this chapter of the accounting of the Mishkan, of all the items that were brought, the weight of each thing and what it was used for, we find a fascinating midrash. Midrash Rabbah tells us the following. Moshe Rabbeinu said, Omar lehem, after the Mishkan was done, Bova ani oseh lifnechem cheshbon. I'm going to make an accounting. I'm going to provide the receipts, the invoices. There's going to be the annual report. Everyone who donated to the Mishkan will be able to see what went for what. Okay, so he said, Kach v'kach yotzal ha-Mishkan. He was explaining each thing. Adshu yoshev u'mechashev. While he was sitting there and doing the accounting, Shachach be'elef u'shramios v'chamisha v'shivim shekel. He saw that there was an amount, 1,775 shekel, and he couldn't remember what he did with them. These were for the vovim, for the hooks that held up the curtains, those sheets which made up the courtyard of the Chotzer. And Moshe Rabbeinu started to think, now people are going to say Moshe Natolon. Moshe Rabbeinu must have taken that money. Ma asa, what happened? Heira Kodesh Baruch Hu Einav, Kodesh Baruch Hu lit up his eyes, v'ra'osam asuyim vavim lamudim. And Moshe Rabbeinu saw, the hooks. That was it. That was where the money went. Osa shor nispaisu kol Yisrael al meleches hamishkan. At that moment, there was pius. There was a sense of, not exactly peace, but appeasement, a happiness, a satisfaction with Am Yisrael in what was done for the Mishkan. Mi garam lo? What brought this about? Al yidei sheyoshav u'pisan, because Moshe Rabbeinu was able to appease them by showing them the accounting, by showing them everything that was done, and that was the accounting. Now, on one hand, it worked out very well, and he was able to fill in that hole. But the Medrash continues asking why Moshe Rabbeinu really felt obligated to do this. The Medrash says, right, Loma soimoin cheshbon. Why did Moshe Rabbeinu do this accounting? HaKadosh Baruch Hu yizbarach shmo ma'amino. HaKadosh Baruch Hu certainly trusts Moshe Rabbeinu. It tells us in Parshas Ba'aloscha, Lochein avdi Moshe b'chol beisi nemonhu. Moshe Rabbeinu is the most trusted of anyone in my house. So then why did Moshe Rabbeinu say, I'm going to do this accounting? Sheshama Moshe leitzonei Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu heard the buzz, the tweets, the twitters from the leitzonim of Am Yisrael. When you hear the word leitzan, erase that image of the happy clown at your kid's birthday party. A leitz, as we see him portrayed so often in Mishlei, is a very negative person. It's a sarcastic, cynical person who tries and uses his abilities to put everything down, to cast doubt on things that shouldn't be doubted. What would they say? This was hinted to in a pasuk we had previously. When Moshe Rabbeinu would go to Ohel Moed, Yerid Amud Ha'onon, the pillar of cloud would come down, surrounding and standing Pesach Ohel Moed v'diberei Moshe, and Hashem would speak with Moshe. And it says, V'hibitu acharei Moshe, the people would watch Moshe as he was entering the Mishkan in this way. Now, when you're watching something, and the habit really expresses an intense type of watching, usually there's some type of dialogue going on in your mind. What are you thinking while you're watching? Rabbi Yochanan says some very positive thoughts. They were thinking, Ashrei Yoladato Shel Zeh, right? Fortunate is the one who gave birth to this one. Umahi Robo Kol Yomov. What does his mother get to see? That all his days HaKadosh Baruch Hu medaber imo. Kol Yomu Mushlam LaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every day of his life, HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaks to him. He has this whole connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A beautiful thing. The Medrash, Mefarshim on the Medrash even say that Yocheved was still alive to be able to witness this. But there's another opinion. Rabbi Chama says, Hayu Omrim Chame Kedal Divrei de Amram. Look how fat the neck of Amram's son is. Amram's son is already a way of putting down Moshe Rabbeinu. Ben Amram, not even giving him his name, his title. This idea of him putting on some weight around the neck, the Mefarshim explain, and it really goes on to say in the Mishnah, that it continued. Chaver Omar lo, his friend answers him, of course he's put on some weight. Adam sheshalat al melechas hamishkan, enato mevakish she'oshir. Again, the image of the weight is not necessarily literal from calories. It means he has got himself fattened, so to speak, at our expense. The friend says, listen, he was in charge of the Mishkan. Okay, there were millions in donations of gold and silver and jewels and all these kind of things. Do you think it's not going to work out, that he's going to end up being rich? Amalhem Moshe Chayechem, Moshe Rabbeinu says, by your life, Nigbar Mishkan. When the Mishkan is done, I'm going to give a cheshbon. Ele Pikudei Mishkan. So that is our mysterious medrash. So a few questions that we'll have, starting with the Shem Mishmuel and others. With all of this, the Shem Mishmuel asks, why in the world, it can't be that everyone in Am Yisrael was saying this. Again, those were late Sonim. Right? Those were late Sonim. These were not admirable people. The admirable people in Am Yisrael were saying, like the first sheet of Rabbi Yochanan, how wonderful it is, how fortunate Moshe Rabbeinu is. But there were some people on the sides who were saying such things. Now, it doesn't make sense that anybody would believe this. Moshe Rabbeinu had plenty of opportunity to get wealthy, which he ignored. He ignored the wealth in Mitzrayim, when everybody was taking klei kesef u'klei zav from their neighbors. Chazal tells us he was osek b'aron shel Yosef. He simply went to make sure that the aron of Yosef was going to be taken out to be brought to Eretz Yisrael. At Yam Suf, where Am Yisrael were gathering up the bizas hayam, the spoils of the Yam, again tremendous wealth, Moshe Rabbeinu shooed them off, said, okay, enough, we have to go now to receive Torah. He wasn't gathering. And in fact, Moshe Rabbeinu was independently wealthy. Chazal tell us that there was a machzav shel sanpirinon, that a quarry of sapphire opened up right by his tent. He used these stones to make the second luchos, and all that was left over from it was his. He didn't need anything. So the fact that these people would make such a statement seems ridiculous. The Shem Mishmuel says, would Moshe Rabbeinu really have to react to these people? And if it's such people who would say something which is so just inconceivable, could he even satisfy them? Shem Mishmuel says that we have a general rule in these midrashim where if we see unidentified Rishoyim doing something, the clasps, it's dasan va'aviram. And he says, we know that dasan va'aviram, the only way that quieted them was what happened to them in Parshas Korach. Otherwise, you can show them receipts until the end of the day, and they'll still keep bad-mouthing you. So why would Moshe Rabbeinu do that? And what good would it do? Explains the Shem Mishmuel. He says that in reality, it was the opposite. It wasn't that Am Yisrael pressured Moshe Rabbeinu to do an accounting. Moshe Rabbeinu said, this is my initiative. Bo v'ani osei lifnechem cheshbon. And Am Yisrael were hurt. Right? They were aluvim ma'od mi Moshe. They felt very bad. They felt, what does Moshe Rabbeinu think we think of him? Why is he making us do this? To sit there while he's putting out all the receipts and going over with us, as if he thinks that we are such fools, that we're suspecting him of stealing from the donations? Kovshu pneim bakarka, they were sitting there with their face down, but what could they do? Moshe Rabbeinu had a din of melech, and he said, this is what we're doing, and you're going to sit here, and I'm going to go through every single detail with you. But then they saw that Moshe Rabbeinu forgot something. There was a discrepancy. those 1,000+ shekel, but he didn't know what happened to them. And if he wasn't able to identify it, this would have looked bad. He says, therefore, this was a pious Yisrael. Now Am Yisrael said, oh, Moshe Rabbeinu taught us something very powerful and beautiful here. He taught us that everyone has to do a cheshbon. Everyone has to go through. Everyone has to try to make something transparent. And even though it was embarrassing for us, he wanted to teach us that lesson, and it's an important lesson, and something that we were able to internalize, that we saw the to'elis of the cheshbon, and that helped them feel better. That was that pious. Okay, now, the Talmud Rebbe has an approach to this which gets deep into our psychology. He said, in reality, it's hard to believe that even the people who said such things about Moshe Rabbeinu, those people on the edges, that Moshe Rabbeinu caught the buzz of people saying Moshe Rabbeinu must be enriching himself to our expense, they probably didn't believe it themselves either. He said it's a fascinating thing that we discover. The power of Hotzoas Dibo, of Lashon Hara, of habitually saying negative things about people, habitually listening to negative things about people, looking for the bad in people, transforms a person. It becomes part of your internal dialogue. And you will find yourself saying things about other people, or at least throwing out the possibility of things about other people, even though you really don't believe it. Then why would you say it if you don't believe it? So that's exactly the danger of that toxin of Lashon Hara that enters us. It creates a culture of Lashon Hara that a person will just throw out these ideas, these thoughts, these maybes, even though the person really doesn't believe it. Now, I have to admit that when I first saw that, I thought that that was a bit far-fetched. But then I thought a little more deeply, and I realized that that's definitely there. That's definitely there inside of us, inside of all of us. And I'm going to bare my soul for a second and share with you an incident that really brought it out to me, that made me look myself in the face and say, Ochen Yetzer Sochen Banu. There's the Yetzer right inside of me. And this was it. My oldest grandson had his Chumash party a couple years back. This was done in his school in Bnei Brak. It was a major affair with music and costumes and all sorts of stuff. So in the middle, this rather long process, the band struck up some music and everybody stood up from their seats, and over the microphone they announced, we are honored that the great Rav Tzaddik Talmid Chacham, Rabbi so-and-so, has come here to this Chumash Suda, this Chumash Masiba, and he will personally give the Chumash to this boy, whatever his name was, Shlomi Greenberg. And the Rav came in and he picked up a Chumash from the pile that were there, and Shlomi was pushed out towards him, and he gave the Chumash to Shlomi and gave him a kiss, and he started dancing with Shlomi as the music played. And I heard this voice inside of me saying, why didn't he do that for all the kids? Once he's going to come, why didn't he dance with all the kids? This kid must be like the son of one of his big donors or something. What a horrible thought. But it was there in my mind. After the event was over, I asked my son, I said, what was that with Rav so-and-so? He said, that boy's father passed away a couple weeks ago. That Rav has been accompanying the family during their hard times. And he knew this would be a very hard day for this boy, not having his father. And he came to make it more joyous for him. And I looked at myself in my own mirror. And I said, how did that happen? How did that come out? If you would have asked me, interviewed me, do you really think that this Rav, who's known as a person of not only great mind, but great heart and great sensitivity and great tzedakah and great chesed, came here and singled out one boy because he got some kind of financial benefit from his family and would exclude all the others? I would have said, of course not. I didn't even believe that. I never believed it. Then where did that thought come from? Where did that voice come from? That's the Yetzer Hara. That's the Nachash. That's the serpent that our society has created. And we hear enough of this talk so many times that it gets inside of us. And it starts speaking almost against our will. That is what the midrash was showing us about those people. And it's important to know that it exists. It's important to know that it's there because it affects us very much. The Kapushnitzer Rebbe did so much to help Jews before, during, after World War II. In the period that it was still possible to get Jews out of Europe, he was running around trying to raise money to help people escape before all the doors were closed. At one point, he had the ability to get a family out. He needed $500 very quickly. He ran to the office of a certain businessman, and he asked him, please, can you give me $500? We can save this family. And the man said, Rebbe, I can't give you $500. And the Rebbe started to cry. And the man felt bad. He said, Rabbi, don't cry. Tell me, how much is your cut? I'll give you what would be your cut. And the Rebbe said he felt so crushed and so disheartened about even the future of Judaism in America, if that was the cynicism that was there. If he thought he was coming around to make a few bucks by presenting cases of Jews that needed to escape, because by running that little cottage industry, he could skim off money for himself. Where are we and who are we? He mentioned that story in context with someone he said who was the exact opposite of that. The very selfless Askan, Mike Tress, Elimelech Tress, who worked hand in hand with him selflessly to help so many people. I saw this in smaller incidents as well. When I lived in Flatbush, there was a man, an old European Jew, who used to invite me for Shabbos meals sometime. And in the shtibel where he davened and some other shtiblach, he would go around collecting money for poor people. Now, I heard some people buzzing. He said, yeah, collecting money for poor people. Guess who's the poor person? Him, right? That's who he's collecting. That's who he's distributing. Now, it happened to be that man didn't drive, and he asked me a few times to drive him places to distribute money to people. I took him to their apartments. Why would that person say that when he had no evidence otherwise? It's there. It's inside of us. That nachash is there. And Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to let it be known, to put it out front, that even if it's only there with a few people on the edges, it can spread and it gets into everyone. And he was letting it be known that it's there and that he's tackling it face on. Why hooks? There were so many items in the Mishkan. Why was it that what he forgot was hooks? I believe it could be the following. The word Vav, which means a hook, is a fascinating word. It's spelled Vav Vav. The letter Vav, when you write it out in letters, is also spelled Vav Vav. It's the only palindrome really in the Hebrew alphabet. Mem is written Mem, but with a Mem Sofit afterwards. This Vav Vav can be read back and forth either way. The Vav itself, the form of the letter, is a hook. Vav HaChibur. The Vav connects. The Vav connects things. Even more so, and this in the Sefer Maskil Shlomo, which was written by Rav Shlomo Carlebach Shlita, a cousin of the late famous singer, he says that you have to pay attention to the grammatical power of the letter Vav. Vav is called Vav HaHipuch. The Vav attached to a word is able to transform past into present, past into future, and future into past. It joins the different time zones. This is how he explained the strange midrash that says that we find 6 times in the Torah, 5 or 6 times, that it says Yaakov with a Vav, and correspondingly, Eliyahu is written in Tanakh without a Vav, written Eliyah. Chazal tell us that Yaakov Avinu took those Vavs as collateral to make sure that Eliyahu Navi would fulfill his task of announcing the Geula to Am Yisrael. That sounds very strange. He says the fact that it's a Vav is what's so important. Yaakov Avinu lo meis. Chazal tells us that Yaakov Avinu did not die. Now, we saw the description not long ago in the Torah of his funeral, of his burial. Chazal answered, Ma zaro b'chaim afhu b'chaim. Just as his children are alive, he's alive. Meaning that Am Yisrael, and note that name, Am Yisrael, the nation of Yisrael, Yaakov Avinu, are constantly connected, past to future, future to past, all the way to the future of Eliyahu HaNavi coming to announce Yom Hashem HaGadol VaNorah, from Yaakov Avinu setting up the 12 Shvatim. All of that is connected, and the influences go back and forth with that power of the Vav. There are other sources I saw. The Mojitzer Rebbe, the Divrei Yisrael, brings down from the Zohar Kodesh that the Vavs, the two Vavs represent the Torah, represent connection between Torah Shebal Peh, Torah Shebichsav, Torah in the higher worlds and in our world, beyond my pay grade, but there's a lot going there with the Vav. What was happening there, what Moshe Rabbeinu sensed, was a potential split. Moshe Rabbeinu sensed that things would not be connected. The distrust between Am Yisrael and their leaders, the Lashon Hara that goes, can cause a tremendous rift that can weaken us. And it goes against what the Mishkan was supposed to be doing. The Mishkan itself, we saw the word Vayakhel in the beginning of last week's Parsha. The Mishnah was an aspect of Kehillah, of joining together all of Am Yisrael. Even today, when we daven, the idea that all Jews point towards Har HaBayis when they daven is not for nostalgia. It's a unifying point of all Jews at all places, at all times. V'hoya hamishkan echad, we say in the Parsha, that when it was all put together and all the clasps and hooks were in place, the Mishkan became one. That is who we are, what we are, and what's supposed to be. So the sense that that was in danger was particularly in the world of the Vav. And that was the item that came to counter it and to put it together. Now, another important lesson to learn from this is that a person is human. Even Moshe Rabbeinu was called Isha Elokim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu caused him to forget something in order to help us realize that you have to be careful. You have to take note of the fact that forgetting, of not being careful in things beinonim lachavero, can cause a rift, can cause the vav, the hook, not to work and join us. And therefore we find halachas like the fact that even two Talmidei Chachamim who lend each other money should write a shtar or have witnesses witness this. Now I think this is ridiculous, right? I just asked, my friend, who's a very honorable person, to lend 200 shekel. What's the idea? But it could be that when you finally get around to remembering to pay him 3 months later, and you say, here's the 200 shekel, and he says, wait, it was 400 shekel. No, it was 200. This can be a very big problem. There's a famous story about the Rashash, Rabbi Shmuel Strassen. The Rav, not the Rashash who came from Yemen, but the Rashash from Vilna. He was a great Talmud Chacham, and he also ran a very big and important gemach, a free loan society. It was kept very orderly. There were books, and a person would come, get their loan for a period of time, interest-free, and then was supposed to return it on time. A certain tailor in Vilna borrowed money from the gemach for whatever purpose. He was given the amount of money and the date that he was supposed to repay. And fortunately, he actually got the money earlier than the due date. So he came running to the Rashash, who was sitting in the base medrash, engrossed in a sugya, and he says, Rebbe, I have the money a bit early. This is the money I took from the gemach. And the Rashash was deeply engrossed in the sugya, so he took the money, nodded, and he put it in the sefer, having in mind to put it into the kupah, into the coffers of the gemach later, and to take care of the paperwork. He was so engrossed in the sugya that he forgot about it. Later on, as he was going through the books of the gemach, he noticed that there was a debt. This tailor had not repaid his loan. It happens. So he went to the tailor, and he says, it's come time for you to pay back the loan that you took. He says, Rebbe, I did. And the Rashash showed him in the book. He says, no, it's still active. It's not crossed out. I always cross it out. He says, Rebbe, don't you remember I brought you the money in the base medrash? He says, no, if you would have brought me the money, I would have crossed it out. And this became a problem. And it became known in town. And the very fact that the tailor had what people called the chutzpah to doubt the word of the Rashash caused him to be blacklisted. Nobody went to his tailor shop anymore. People shunned him. He lived in shame. One of his children moved out of town. And then, as it was getting close to Pesach, the Rashash was checking through his farm that there should be no chametz there. And there he found a sum of money. A sum of money with a particular amount that rang a bell, and suddenly he flashed back. And he saw it. He saw what happened. And he realized that he was wrong. He immediately ran to the tailor's house and he threw himself on the floor. He says, please be mochel me. You were right, I was wrong. Please forgive me. And the tailor said, how can I forgive you? The damage is done. You've destroyed my name. You've destroyed my life. What can you do to get forgiveness? The Rashash said, I will personally go with you to every shul in Vilna. And there were a lot of shuls in Vilna. And I will stand up in front of everyone, b'fnei am ve'edo, and I will say, this man was correct. I wronged him. He was right and I was wrong. Taylor said it won't help. People will just say, the Rashash had mercy on me. You're a tzaddik, so you wanted to do that. They still won't believe it. The Rashash thought and thought. He asked the tailor, he says, tell me, do you have a son who's unmarried? He said, I do. He says, I have a daughter who's of marriageable age. Let's have them meet. If they like each other, we'll get married. If we do that, no one would think that I married my daughter off to the son of a person who was a liar and cheater. Then when I tell them that it was my mistake, it'll be believed. And so it was. Rabbi Shuster used to tell that story, and he would say, there's just one of the countless examples of the things that happen in the world to make a very unlikely shidduch take place. But the principle that's there is important. All the Rebbe said, understand that that's there in human nature. What should we learn from that? Number one, don't be put off. If you hear that people are saying things about you, that may be one of the forms the Yetzer Hara does to attack good things that you're doing. You're doing something idealistic, you're doing something that's good for Am Yisrael, and you hear rumors, murmurings. Don't let that stop you from your good work. Understand that that's human nature, an ugly side of human nature. It's a form of the Yetzer Hara, which is coming out through those words. The other side is that because that is the world we live in, and because we're human, be transparent. Try to be, as Chazal said, V'yisem nekim me'Hashem u'miYisrael, right? That you should be clean in the eyes of Hashem and of Am Yisrael. You should let it be seen that things are on the level. We know that if a tzedakah is questionable, so suddenly people don't want to give to any tzedakah, because they'll say, yeah, well, just like that one wasn't legitimate, how do I know that this one is legitimate? Things should be there and should be up front. All these things are vavim. All these things help us stay together, grow together the way that we're supposed to be. Amalek is that which divides. He attacked those who were separated. Chazal say that nobody knew how to say Lashon Hara like Haman. And he said, Yeshno am echad mefuzar u'mefurad bein ha'amim. These people are scattered and divided, and that makes us vulnerable. The response to Amalek, as Esther said, Lech knosis kol Yehudim, gather together all the Jews, and especially the connection of the Jews to their Talmidei Chachamim, to their leaders, to their tzaddikim. In the Parsha of Amalek we found, Ksov zo zikaron b'sefer, v'sim ba'oznei Yoshua. Moshe Rabbeinu is commanded to transmit this to Yoshua, the link from one generation to the next, from the elders of one to the new leaders, to the younger people of the next generation, must be strong, must continue on as a defense against Amalek. So that is one portion that we have involving these vavim, these clips here. And it says that this entire process brought about what was called piyus, an appeasement, so that Am Yisrael were able to feel totally connected to Hashem, to Moshe Rabbeinu, to the Mishkan, and the process became more complete. There's another midrash that I'd like to mention about a different part of the Mishkan with a similar task. It tells us that there were parathim. Parathim were a type of clasp, another form of hook. The curtains of the Mishkan, the Yirus HaMishkan, were made out of cloth, and they had loops on the edges, and the loops were held together by golden clasps. Okay, that's a fine technical aspect of the building, but it's fascinating that we find some big superlatives about those clasps. In the Gemara in Shabbos Daf Tzadites, it says, V'nirin krosin b'lulaos, that these clasps in the loops appeared k'chochovim barakia, like stars in the heavens. That's a very fascinating description of a relatively minor part of the Mishkan. You could say they're shiny. There was lots of shiny stuff in the Mishkan. Some Mefarshim say that because the loops were made out of tcheles, out of this form of blue-green, that therefore it looked like stars on the background of a sky, which can be bluish-greenish of some type. So it's hard to understand why that was particularly singled out. The Medrash Rabbah, also speaks about the difficulty. Moshe Rabbeinu was wondering, can it be possible to make a place for the Shekhinah in this world with our own physical means? And he was told, yes, Ata b'samamonecha v'ani b'chvodi. You will use your paints and dyes and crafts, and I, with my presence, will complete the process. And it gives examples of some of these things, saying that you should know that every physical aspect of the Mishkan parallels something in the higher worlds. Atzei Shitim Omdim, we learned about this in a previous parsha, these Atzei Shitim, those were parallel to what Yechezkel saw in his vision of Srafim Omdim Mima'alo, of the fiery angels that surround the Kisei HaKavod. And then it says, the krosim, these clasps, it says, Mala Mala Kochovim, just like in the heavens there are stars, Afla Maton Kain, so too, down in this world, we have such a thing. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, says, Malamed Shayu Karsei Zohov, those golden clasps, Nirim b'Mishkan kekochovim hanirim b'Rakia. They appeared in the Mishkan like stars that you see in the heavens. Very, very big play given to such a small, minor part of the Mishkan. The Zohar HaKadosh goes even further. It says, Taninan mandalo choma inun krosim b'Mishkan, a person who didn't see those clasps in the Mishkan, l'choma nehiro dekachvaya b'Rakia. You haven't really seen the light of stars in the heavens. If you haven't seen that, you haven't seen nothing yet. Why would it be so important? What's there, and why the connection to stars? So the Tolda Rebbe brought from an old sefer, the Sefer Abris. It was written in the 1700s in Vilna, and it writes about many things about even the phenomena in our world, and he writes a fascinating thing about stars. He says that the light that we see from stars is not necessarily coming from where the star is now. The star may have moved on, or the star may have actually finished. Nonetheless, its light continues on. It continues going. We find another comparison to stars. Teachers of children, Mlamdei Tinoka Shel Beis Rabban, it tells us in Bava Basra, are compared to stars. As the Pasuk says in Daniel, Matzdike harabim kechochavim. Those who do this task, are matzdik, the community, are like kochavim la'olam vo'ed. They're like eternal stars. They say these are melamdei tinokos. From that Sefer Abris, we can understand this idea of eternity. Meaning, a teacher, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a formal teacher in a school, anyone who's teaching, instructing, influencing someone else, should be doing it in a way that you're creating a connection which is going to go on forever, which will go on even if the student's no longer learning from the teacher, even if the teacher is no longer in this world. That's the way the interaction is supposed to be. And it's done by connection, by the krosim, by the clasps. There's another aspect of stars which is fascinating. Out of all the creations, Chazal's midrashim teach us that stars were not created for themselves. They were created again for this concept of pius for the moon. Chazal tell us that the moon complained. It said, if the sun and the moon are equal, you cannot have two kings wearing one crown. So therefore, Hashem told the moon, you must minimize yourself. But then, in order to appease the moon, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave it its accompanying army of stars. So a star is that which comes to connect with someone who may feel separated, to connect with someone even in their down moments, even when they failed, even when they've made a mistake, the idea of connecting them, of making sure that they stay. And that connection is one that can and is meant to go on forever. So this was the tafkid of the mikdash, of the Mishkan. We have to understand that the Mishkan was not just a passive receiver of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence. The Mishkan was meant to transmit, and to this very day, this Sfarim say, transmits Shefa to Am Yisrael. The menorah sends out Chochmah. The Shulchan sends out Parnasa. The previous week we saw what the different Mizbechos did, Mizbech HaChitzon, Mizbech HaPnimi. We also referenced that phrase of the Sefer Charedim that was set into a beautiful song, Bilvavi Mishkan Evne. We're all meant to build the Mishkan inside of ourselves. Again, not just the fact that Hashem's presence should be in us, but that we transmit to those around us. And that can only be done if we connect to those around us. And we can only connect to those around us if we're connected to what was before us and connected to what will be after us. Vavim and Krasim are such key parts of the Mishkan. That oneness, that Vahaya Mishkan Echad, is there for all of us. Chazal tell us that when Titus destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, so he stabbed the parochas, and miraculously, blood started coming out of the parochas. Titus, in his arrogance, thought, as Chazal explained it with a euphemistic language, Chasava haragas atzmo, meaning, so to speak, that he felt he'd killed the one above. And I heard from Rabbi Yonasan David, I believe based on the Maharal, why did that miracle happen? Why did Hashem make such a miracle? It was a message to Bnei Yisrael as well. Realize that the Mishkan, the Beis Hamikdash, is a living entity. Just like as in our bodies, the blood is that which connects everything, which transmits everything through our body, throughout every single part. So too, the Mishkan, the Beis Hamikdash, was echad, it was connection. Here, it was coming apart. In the second Beis Hamikdash, it was destroyed because of sinas chinam, because the vavim and krasim, the hooks and clasps of all types, had become undone, and therefore the lifeblood flowed out of it. We have to try to make sure that our connections stay strong, that Purim, which is really meant to do that, every mitzvah of it, everything from reading the Megillah, about Lech Knesses Kol HaYehudim and the power that they had, to the mitzvahs of Matanos Levyonim, Mishloach Monos, and the Suda, even the idea of drinking when it's done in the right way, in the right measure, an environment of Kedusha and Tahara. Rav Hutner Zatzal gave a beautiful mashal for it. He said he had two businessmen who were great friends in yeshiva, but it's been many years since they saw each other. They're both on a business trip. They're both in the same hotel. They meet each other in the lobby. They're so happy. They hug each other. They start talking, but each one has an assistant. One says, "Excuse me, sir, you have a meeting in 20 minutes. The other one says, "Sir, our car is here for the meeting. We have to go." And they looked at each other. They said, "This doesn't go. We need time to be together." There was a bar in the lobby, so they pointed the assistants to the bar. They said, "You know what, guys, take the company credit card, buy as much as you want to drink." The assistants go and drink and fall asleep, and the two friends get to fabreng, get to be together joyfully. He said, we are all one, we were all together at Har Sinai. What separates us? The guf. On Purim, we put the guf to sleep. That guf is like that assistant that schleps us away from our friends. We put the guf to sleep so that the neshamas can rejoice together. This is the preparation that we have as we're approaching Purim. And remember that behind the story of Purim is the rebuilding of the second Beis Hamikdash, which resulted from it. May we be zoche to a chodesh of simcha, and to la Yehudim ha'isa'ara v'simcha v'sas and vikar. We should appreciate the light of clasps and hooks and make them stronger and enjoy them together with each other. Have a wonderful Shabbos Kol Tov.